2, 3. Great. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you can see the whole slide in there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, now you're back to your, I'm back to your screen again.
Yeah, I just exited.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Shoot, we were recording the beginning of this meeting. I'm going to pause it for a second.
People together. There's so much richness in having you guys from all over the country here. It's terrific. So I'm really excited to be doing this with Vanessa, and we hope it's good for you.
Great, thank you, Sue. So I'm going to quickly go over the agenda so you know that what we're going to be doing today. And I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, here we go. Can everybody see this?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So right now we're in the welcoming and going over the agenda, and then in a few minutes Sue is going to go over some best practices for ensuring that video meeting works smoothly. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time getting to know each other in pairs, and then coming back together and introducing our partner to the rest of the group. And then we're going to get into why we tell stories. Why is this something that we focus on at Mothers at Front? And what are the stories that we tell that are relevant to the work that we're doing? We will go into an example of a mom who has developed and told her story really effectively to create change, and really pick that apart to understand what she did that worked as an example. And then we'll listen to Sue, who's co-facilitating here, Sue's story, and sort of go deeper into our understanding. And so really the purpose of this part of the training is to give you a sense of what it is we're talking about when we talk about telling our story as moms as part of Mothers at Front, and how our stories are crafted, how we use them. And then you're going to get a chance then to go away from this training. You'll have a week to work on your story and develop it, and pair up with somebody else on this call, and check in maybe for a half hour between now and next Sunday to practice and get feedback. And then we'll come back next Sunday at this time and share our stories with the whole group and get some feedback. To be clear, this is a very, this is a process. And so this training today is really the first step, in an iterative process, and you shouldn't feel like you're going to get it perfectly or you have to retain everything. It's really an introduction. And so don't worry if you don't catch all of it. Are there any questions about the agenda? Okay. All right, Sue, I'm going to put up the norms. Sure.
Okay, let's just go through these quickly. If you mute yourself when you're not speaking, that is really important. It keeps all the background noise down. But then it's important to remember to unmute yourself when you're speaking. So, just keep your hand ready on that mute button. One person at a time. It's very difficult in an online meeting like this to have more than one person talking. So we're going to keep time carefully and have one person speaking at a time. Is there anybody? There's nobody on the phone here today, is there? Everybody's okay. So that one, we don't have to talk about that. Here's the most important one: step up, step back. Some of us speak up very readily in a group like this, and what we want to say comes to us quickly and easily. We tend to speak up. People like that should think about stepping back and let others, for whom it takes longer to generate thoughts or who aren't as comfortable speaking in a big group, let them step up. So the idea is, if you're a quieter person, you should be working hard to push yourself to step up. And if you're someone who jumps in easily, think about stepping back and letting others jump in first. It's safe to take risks. We are just a bunch of moms trying to do this work better and better and better. And so there are no stupid questions. You can risk whatever you want. Just keep that in mind. We're just moms. And we're doing the best we can, every one of us. So that's that.
That's great. Thank you, Sue. And adding to what Sue said, we're also just moms, which means we're super powerful and we have a lot to bring to the table. So everything you bring to the table is really important. And so did anybody want to add sort of a norm that they feel strongly about to make sure that this meeting goes well? All right. So I'm going to break us into groups, and we're going to spend about 5 minutes pairing up to just introduce ourselves to each other. So if you could let the person that you're speaking to know who you are, where you live, whether or not you have children in your lives, and then why are you here today? What called you to this meeting? And then you'll each have 2 minutes. I'll let you know when it's time to switch. And then come back. When we come back, you'll introduce your partner, but because there are a lot of us on the call, I'll ask you to make it really quick. So you'll say, you know, who the person you were talking to was, where they live, and maybe how long they've been involved with Mothers Out Front. All right, so
Can I say one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
If you've never been in one of these Zoom breakout groups before, it's a little startling. All of a sudden, boom, you're going to be there with just one other person. So don't be alarmed. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and I'm currently assigning groups here. So I'm going to, sorry, it's going to take me a second. So if you could be patient, I would really appreciate it. I'm trying to mix you by state so that across states, because some of you already know each other. And the last group here. And Sue, I'm not assigning you to a room because we don't have the right number. All right, so I'm gonna press a magic button. It's sort of like in Bewitched, and you're gonna go off into your rooms, and you're gonna have 4 minutes to introduce each other to one another. Have fun. Oops, no, I don't want to add a room. I want to send you off in a room. Okay, open all rooms. There we go. You and I can talk to each other.
That's cool. That's cool. I'm taking notes. Thank you. Anything to add to the norms? I forgot about that. It's okay. We get better every time.
That's why we're tag teaming, right?
Right.
Oh wait, I need to time this.
Oh, right. So we lost 2 people, one because of the time and one whose laptop.
Yeah, she dropped her laptop and she doesn't have 2 hours worth of being able to join the call. Oh, I'm gonna pause the recording here.
She's a mother of 2 girls, 12 and 4, and I thought her point of view is very interesting. She is taking this. She's been part of Mothers Out Front for 3 years and has taken this narrative training before and wants to take it again to refresh it up. And she is trying to reach people specifically who are not completely sold on climate change, which is I'm out in Silicon Valley, so I think it's a little bit of a different environment over here, whereas Ohio, there's quite a bit of people, probably more to reach, to get to change their mind or get on board with the program, if you will. So I applaud that courage of trying to reach those people who might not be completely sold on it yet. So yeah.
So I also spoke with Laura Finnegan, and she's in San Jose, California, and she has a 2-year-old daughter and is also pregnant with her 2nd child. And she got involved with Mothers Out Front August, September, looking for an opportunity to volunteer in something that would positively impact her daughter's future. So Mothers Out Front was a good fit for that. And she wants to she's here today because she wants to both get more involved with Mothers Out Front, participate in things, but also because she thinks that this is a valuable skill that she's going to be able to put to use.
Excellent. Well,
And I think I'm the last person.
Yep, I think that was great. And we are right on time, which is amazing. I was just looking at the, all right, so I'm gonna pass it on to Sue, who's gonna go over why we tell stories, well, she's not gonna tell you why we tell stories, she's gonna facilitate that portion. So I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna go into that. So let's see.
Okay,
Hey, Sue.
so here we all are for 2 hours talking about stories. So we thought it would probably be a good idea to step back and say, why? Why are we talking about stories? What's the point of stories? Why are stories powerful? You've all heard good stories. You've probably told a few yourself. So why do we tell stories? What's the point here of telling stories, especially in the context of Mothers Out Front, where we're really trying to get our country off of fossil fuels? Why tell stories?
So feel free to jump in.
Feel free to jump in, unmute. Remember to unmute.
I think we tell stories so we can change the false narratives of that we need to be dependent on fossil fuels, and that that our reliance on fossil fuels. I think we just need to change the narrative of how we're so dependent on fossil fuels, and the powers that be feel that it's the way, and it has always been the way that our society has operated. I think we also need to change the narrative about how we have other options and who's impacted by these fossil fuels. So that's just a couple thoughts.
So how is it that stories can do that? We do want to change the narrative. We better change the narrative, but how is it that stories are going to, what is it about stories that are going to give us power? Anybody jump in, but unmute yourself. Jennifer Knickerbocker.
Oh, did I do it? Yes. We changed the narrative, and the stories are important because what's most personal is most universal. And that's the way that I tell stories, is sharing something very deeply personal and emotional and vulnerable, and other people can relate, regardless of whether or not they have walked in my shoes. They have felt the impact and the emotion, and they can see it from a new perspective.
Nice. I like that phrase. Regardless of whether they've walked in your shoes, they know what the emotions are, and we can share those emotions. Nice point. Anyone else? Why stories? What's powerful about stories? Yeah, Gail.
I think too, stories really touch the heart. And like when you get at feelings more than just facts, it tends to sink in a different way. People can gloss over hearing all the facts, but stories hit it in a different way. So.
Great point. In fact, we've known the facts for 20, 30 years. Doesn't seem to be moving people particularly. So all the more reason to go for the heart instead of those head things. Anyone else? What is it about stories?
I think stories are just a very basic part of who we are as human beings. It's how we see our lives. It's how we define ourselves. It's much more than just talking. It's how we connect. It's how we interact with the world. And I think, like everybody was saying, that if we can change the way people see that by sharing our own stories, coming from a place of vulnerability and connecting emotionally, then we can change the overarching narrative of the conversation, really. So, yeah.
Nice. And there's research that says we're natural born storytellers. In fact, if you just listen to conversations over the next week, almost everything in the conversations in which we engage is storytelling. That's just what we do. We tell stories. Anybody else? Yeah, Gail, you're...
Just one more quick point. I think it's something we have permission to do. too, because I'm not a climate scientist, you know, and I don't have any special skills in this realm, but I can at least share what I'm feeling and why it's so important to me. You know, I may not have the answers, but I want to make sure we're asking the questions, you know.
Yeah, nice point. Nice point.
Sue, you want me to share that slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Surprise, surprise. You have.
Let's see, yeah, whether you got it right.
Yeah, did you get the right answers?
Let's see.
Much better coming from you than coming from a slide.
Definitely. Let's see. Okay, so this is what we came up with.
People like telling and listening to stories. We can see each other. I mean, you've covered everything, guys. You've covered everything. Creates connection and builds relationships. And by touching people emotionally, I think the bottom line, especially for us in Mothers Out Front, is that telling stories can move people to action. It can help make people actually do something. And that's why it's important that all of our stories have a very specific ask in them. We're asking people to do something. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But so great. We know why we're here. That's very important.
Awesome.
So what stories do we tell?
Yeah, so what are the, well, first is, yeah, how am I?
Oh, right. Yeah, how are you going to use this? Good point. Forgot about this one. So you're going to come away after the next week with your story drafted. What are you going to do with it? Well, one thing you can do with it is just go out and use it to speak to somebody one-to-one. One way that we grow our movement is to meet with people one-to-one. And in a one-to-one meeting, one of the best ways to introduce yourself is to share your story, because it shares part of you, and it begins to develop an emotional tie with the person you're speaking to. So that's one way. Second way would be at meetings or rallies. You might get up and tell your story as a means of motivating and inspiring others to do something. And finally, you might use it at a hearing or a public meeting with decision makers, asking them to do something very specific. Often the people in the legislature hold a lot of power, so you can use your story in speaking to them, and we hope moving them to act. So all these different ways, and I know some of you have an opportunity in the next week or two to really get out in public and do this, but even if you don't, just using your story in a one-to-one meeting with another Mothers Out Front person or with someone who you think might be interested in getting involved, perfect way to use it. Okay, now.
So then, yeah, the questions are, what stories do we tell? And as we go into this, I do hope that you'll all really be thinking about how you're going to use this, because one of the things we talk about in Mothers Out Front trainings is that we've seen over and over is use it or lose it. And the training is really just one step in the learning process, and developing it's not going to be nearly as effective, and you're not going to learn nearly as much if you don't try it out. And there's a saying that learning to do this work is like riding a bicycle. Somebody can tell you about it, you can read about it, but you really don't know how to do it until you try it out for yourself. So we really want to encourage you to think about how you're going to use your story. All right, so let's go into what story do we tell? Like, what do we talk about? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. But I sent you some prompts to think about. I don't know how many of you had a chance to think about it, but it would be really great to go around and hear from each of you for about a minute. What in your life happened that made you want to take action? Like, why are you here today? Why are you part of Mothers Out Front? Or is there another time in your life where you said, I have to do something about this? And what was that about? So I'm going to call on the first person, and then we can pass it on. I'll start with Laura. And I do want to just be mindful of time. So I'm going to time people not to be rude, but just to keep the meeting on track. So I'll give you a minute. So Laura, you want to start? Laura Skidmore.
I was wondering which Laura. Okay, so I got started, I was a teacher and felt a pull to move into some kind of environmental work and didn't really know what. I was also pregnant at the same time. So I took time off and was really thinking about it. What do I want to do? And then after my daughter Charlotte was born, suddenly through all of this reading about what the world was going to look like in 2030 and 2040 and 2050, suddenly with my daughter there, it was all very clear. It was no longer abstract that in 2030 she was going to be this age, and in this year she was going to be in kindergarten. This is what the world was going to look like. And since it was no longer abstract, I felt like I had to do something. Like I had to get involved for my daughter's future. Let's see, Colleen.
Hi. Well, mine is kind of a, I guess, rambling way to get it. I'm a professional artist by trade, and over the years, it's interesting. When I went to my first Mothers Out Front meeting just this past fall, it kind of came together for me that I had been painting environmental scenes for most of my 23, 24 years of career, very detailed, realistic scenes where I do research everything from the Arctic to Antarctic to rainforests in Brazil and the Serengeti, and it really was my eldest daughter getting involved with some environmental things that kind of sparked my interest in wanting to do it. And then at the same time, I also had a very compelling interest that was from a different side of things, as personally as a mom, wanting to, I finally started to want to have my voice heard. And I felt a lot of other women and mothers like me who've been doing the juggling act. There were things we were passionate about. We'd been holding our tongue, or we'd been too busy with other things. And those things kind of came together within this organization and within this opportunity to, get with other women and encourage each other to motivate our personal impulses into a collective movement. And so it's a bit of a mixed bag, but this really brings a lot of things together I'm very interested in.
Thanks. You want to pick the next person?
Sorry. Let's do Gail.
Okay. The first time in my life that I felt truly motivated to make a difference was when I was living in New York when 9/11 happened. And it was the first time in my life that I was truly, truly scared. So I quit my job as an art director and became a New York City teaching fellow, taught high school in the Bronx for a few years. And then when I was pregnant with my eldest daughter, my husband took a job in DC. So we moved when I was 6 months pregnant, and I hadn't been working since that time. I'd done a bunch of volunteer work. Then I fell into this very polarizing job here in Santa Cruz. And it was an environmental thing, but I had to learn to balance very strong emotions on two sides that both were meaning well. And I feel like there's a lot of that going on in the country right now. And I'm just feeling very scared for my children's future and wanting to make a difference, and very frustrated actually that we're not out in the streets about this. Like the Women's March is coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'm just looking for more ways to make this a vocal cause.
You want to?
Yeah. How about Marnice?
Yes. So I got my start back in 2005 doing environmental work with the Hurricane Katrina impact. But fast forward, it really came full circle when I moved in a area where the city I live in, Pontiac, Michigan, and we had some environmental impacts that are still going on today. Where both of my children couldn't go outside because of the awful smell. And so I don't know if there was a correlation to why they developed asthma, but they have asthma now. And so I knew that it was an environmental impact. I had a position doing energy justice work. So I kind of was familiar with what harmful emissions look like. And so that's why I decided to get more active. I went to graduate school. I visited New Orleans and different environmental areas to see, to become more of an expert. And so I found that I wanted to do more because I found that it's an economic, racial, gender issue, and seeing the fact that I can't even go to Detroit, Michigan, where we have the pollutest area zip code, because both of my kids have asthma and they will need a breathing treatment or their inhaler just to stay outside. So it's personal and it's a passion of mine. So.
Thanks, Marnice. Do you want to pick the next person?
Okay, I will go to, let me see. Who's on the phone? 617.
I think that's Stephanie, and I think she's auditing.
Okay, well, I'll go to Linda.
Thanks. Actually, not Linda, just because she's also auditing. So,
okay. I'll go to, did Colleen go?
Yeah, Colleen did. Let's see, who hasn't gone? Christine? Or Jennifer?
Yeah, let's go to Jennifer.
Hello. So I have been involved in environmental issues since I was a small child. My mother is very passionate about environmental issues, but it really was important to me when I was in my early 20s and I received a check in the mail from the government, and it was a check for about $35. And the reason I got the check was because I'm Indigenous, and the government sent me a check because it was payment for land that they took from my tribe a long time ago, and they said it was a clerical error. And what they did with that land was they destroyed it, they sold it to other people, and they built pipelines. And then I got more involved with my tribal sovereignty issues. And I found out that they were trying to run pipelines, the Keystone Pipeline, right through our Manoomin fields. And Manoomin is the staple food, ceremonial food, and lifeblood of our people. It's the number one employer. It's the number one way that we are able to give our people scholarships and housing. And they were going to run a pipeline right straight through it. So I recognized environmental racism. I recognized the government's push to marginalize people. My birthright was being taken away from me, and it was all for big corporate business, profit, and greed, in a nutshell. Next person, let's see, Christine.
All right, so I grew up in a household that encouraged lots of scientific discovery and lots of reading, and we've had a subscription to National Geographic magazine since I was a little kid, still do. I'm going to be 37 next week, and I feel like I've been reading about climate change and environmental degradation since I could start reading. So as a kid with a healthy developed sense of injustice, I wanted to do whatever I could to save the environment. I was an outdoors kid. We were out playing all the time. I think it felt like I didn't know what I could do until recently. With the election of Trump, it just felt like something had to happen. And it was up to me, if no one else, to step up and start trying to find a way to fix things. So finding Mothers Out Front gave me that outlet. And has Laura Finnegan gone yet? Nope. All right, Laura, you should go.
I think I'm the last one. So, I mean, what ultimately spurred me to action is the birth of my daughter. I think, any mom who has a child, you feel that extremely visceral feeling to protect them. And I think in those very young years, or the infant stages, it's almost obsessive. So when I started thinking about my daughter and her future, and things that could negatively impact her, two things stood out, one of which is women's rights and the other which is climate change. And climate change ultimately took over my focus because that's a matter of survival, whereas women's rights is over quality of life. I can go more into how I think they're two sides of the same coin, but anyway, so I think the real moment that solidified my need to get involved and take action was I read the book 6 Degrees. I don't know if anybody's read that. It was written in 2009, and it just describes the planet based on the research at the time, based on how it would change both from an environmental but also a socioeconomic impact. By each degree, we would increase by 1 degree Celsius. And it just became very clear to me that not enough focus is being put on this issue, not enough change is happening quickly enough. I think it's one of those issues that is very easy to ignore because we don't feel the immediate results of it. But by the time we do feel that impact, it's going to be far too late. And so that's what caused me to feel that sense of real urgency. And I think fear, it's really fear driven that drives that urgency to make an impact for my daughter and her future, to make sure that her quality of life will not be compromised. I mean, I think in some sense it already will be, but anything that we can do to make it better. So.
Great. Well, thank you all. Everybody went, right? That's not auditing. All right. Well, thank you so much. So you all have really the basis of really powerful stories, right? Going back to what we talked about why we tell stories, that every single one of you said something that I know moved me deeply, that made me angry, that made me want to, really feel grateful that you all are on this call and that we're figuring this out together. And I just want to highlight a few things. So when we talk about moving people to action, there are sort of 3 things that we need to establish. One is, who are we and why do we have credibility and why are we there? And the things that I heard you all talk about is, because you've talked about your children, whether your children having asthma, realizing, thinking about how they'll be in 2030. You talked about being moms and being moved by that. So that's sort of your story that establishes sort of, why you're taking that step in the eyes of the people that you're speaking to. The second piece I heard you all talk about is, women and coming together and being moms as a group. And Colleen talked about, being tired of not having her voice heard and having, other women and others like us who are doing this juggling act, holding our tongue, and that this organization is a way, hopefully, to motivate our personal impulses into collective movement. And the reason that's important is when you're talking to people is that we're not doing this alone, right? We're not going to fight this and win one person at a time. And it is about doing something together. And so you're really, in telling your story and referring to what we can do together and why we think we can do something together, you're really drawing on your audience, whether it's a public official or other moms, to join us in this movement and giving faith that there's something that we can do together. And then the third piece, which we didn't get as into, is, what are we called to do together? What are we trying to do? And I heard, several references to Trump. Jennifer talked about what happened to her land and the Keystone XL pipeline and the implication of wanting to build more. And so really we're calling people to action to do something, to fight back, and to create the future we want instead of letting corporations create the future that they want for our kids. And so those 3 components are called the story of self, sort of who are you, what's called you to action, the story of us, which is who are we together collectively that we know we're going to be able to do something bigger than ourselves, and that gives us the faith that we can do it. And then the story of now, which is what is the fierce urgency of now, which is something Barack Obama talked about. What are we called to do now that is urgent and hopefully hopeful? And then within that, there was a lot of granularity and just really interesting tidbits that you all gave, right? Jennifer talked about receiving the $35 check. That really stuck in my mind. Marnie's talked about, she can't go to Detroit without giving her kids an asthma treatment. And so, as you think about what makes stories compelling, is you really want to have those three components: who you are, who are we, what are we called to do, and then most of you, really everybody, made it about a moment in time, right? You didn't like give a laundry list of, well, it was, it wasn't a rational thing. It was about a moment where you realized you had to act. So those are the components that you want in your story. So we're going to dig more into that throughout this training, but I wanted to really highlight those things. Are there any questions at this point? All right, so we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to watch a mom who used her story in front of the Boston City Council. Her name is Claire Humphrey, and I had sent you the link, so some of you may have already seen it. But now that you've had this introduction, I want you to listen to it and really think about what works about that story. Like, what draws you in? Does it call you to action? Does it not? What's effective about it? Can you hear the three components: the story of self, the story of us, the story of now? So let me share my screen. Hopefully, if there's any problems with the sound, I'm going to start it and then I'll check in to make sure that you all can hear it well, because we had one training where that didn't work. So I'm going to do that right now. And yeah, so.
My daughter Lucy, who's 14.
Can you hear it? Okay.
Is over there. And she is sitting next to her baseball nut of a brother, George. These are the faces that I have in mind when I do this work. I'm a member of Mothers Out Front. We are a group of mothers and grandmothers. We work with a lot of allies, and a number of whom are represented here today. Would everybody who's here from Mothers Out Front please stand up? We work to build political will to stop climate change that is threatening all our children. Mothers Out Front met over the summer with most of them. And I was impressed with your willingness to meet with us and the time and attention that you gave us. So I wanted to say thank you. And I wanted to thank you for holding this hearing. Besides raising my own kids, for the last 10 years, I've been the owner of a preschool center serving our youngest neighbors in Jamaica Plain. And through this, I've seen hundreds of parents. I see how much love and energy and time and money that people put out for their children. When my son was very young, he loved trains. And my family went to Legoland, and right inside the entrance to Legoland, there is a top-up train. It's still the only part of the Legoland I've ever seen. Because there's a little tiny train, 3-4 cars, and I rode that train, and the cars are really small, so my knees were under my chin, okay? And I sat behind George, and I rode that train 37 times to make a 3-year-old happy. So I understand what parents will do for their kids' happiness and their safety, and I understand how much they're invested in their future. But I also see that we are not addressing one of the biggest threats to their future and their safety that's out there, which brings me here today. I know many of you are parents, and you have faces in mind when you do this work. But even if you're not parents, I know you care about kids and their future, or you wouldn't do this job. You have faces in mind too, just like all of us do. I know that there's a lot of pressing issues and threats that demand the time and attention of the City Council daily. But I have trouble thinking of one that isn't going to be worse if we don't get in front of this, either directly or from resources that will have to be redirected elsewhere. Think about that, and think about those faces. All these people who came here today have come in the middle of a workday. It's the time of day when school kids need to be picked up and after-school activities are starting. So this represents a whole lot of carpool savers that got pulled in today. And it also represents a lot of concern about the threats from gas leaks. Climate change has been a known issue since I was Lucy's age. And there are gas leaks in Boston that are twice her age. The signs that people are holding up, okay, these are admitted unrepaired leaks reported by the utilities. They go back 30 years. And there are proposals to build more pipelines at taxpayer expense that will, and into residential areas of Boston, that will lock us into fossil fuels for the next 50 years or more. And so we are all here today to say, fix the leaks first, and fix the leaks fast. It's good for the city, for the people, and the future. And I have one more point, which was kind of made before. What you do here today on this issue, this goes way beyond Boston. Every city and town in Massachusetts is facing the same issue, and many more beyond. So you do have a chance to be leaders here. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was, could everybody hear that all right?
Yeah.
Had you heard it before? Did you listen to it before? So that this was a second hearing, great. So let's just dig into that a little bit. What makes that a good story? What makes that a good speech? What stood out for you? Yeah.
I would say it's very relatable and personal, and I especially love the line of having called in all the carpool favors. I think just calling even attention to the fact it's so hard to get people to these kinds of meetings, especially if they are busy moms with many tasks. So very relatable. She told a personal anecdote, and then she brought it from the general climate change issues to the specific one they were trying to address, which was the specific gas leaks and getting those fixed. So I felt it had that nice arc that you guys were talking about.
Nice. Other people?
I connected most with her anger at the end. So I think just a display of emotion that felt very real and powerful to me. And you could sense it. And that's something that it reminded me of my, it's kind of, my own feelings around this issue and why I feel so compelled to act. So
what was it in her speech, Laura, that you felt was the good expression of her anger?
When she was talking about how they were building more gas lines and how they needed to fix these leaks, and that's infuriating to me, is how we keep pushing forward on these things that we know are bad for the environment, and we keep making these poor decisions. And especially since we know clean energy is it can be more efficient, it can be better. It's just a bad use of resources, and it's particularly infuriating because it's powered by money, essentially by gas and oil companies and politicians who are in their pockets. And that to me is, he didn't say that specifically, but that kind of like called up all my own feelings around that topic. So yeah.
Okay. Others?
I wanted to say that I think one of the things that works very well in this is she has one very clear, concrete ask at the end. She very clearly says, fix the leaks now. Before doing anything else, fix the leaks now.
Others? What's your thoughts? Did this speak to you? Did it draw you in? And if so, what was it that drew you in?
And did it make you want to take action?
Did anyone notice catch the Lego train example?
Yeah, she used relatable stories that, especially to get at parents who are decision makers, that everybody has something similar to that Lego story, that it's funny and it's lighthearted, but it also kind of digs deep into people's personal feelings too.
Yeah. And the details that she put in it, chewing on her knees. I mean, you can picture her sitting there, a little Lego train. Any other thoughts just that jumped out at you? One of you mentioned early on, she said, I don't remember who it was, I'm not a scientist, and what I like about this is that I can be myself and tell my story. How much time did she spend talking about anything technical in this speech? Did you notice that? And how much was just stuff she was talking about herself and George, and that everybody there is either a parent or at least cares about kids and how things are going to get worse. All of that is stuff that any mom can talk about. And she really didn't get technical till she mentioned way at the end something about the leaks and the pipelines, and then she, you know, went for it with her ask. All right.
Did people hear how she created the story of us?
It's hard to hear you, Vanessa.
What?
Volume.
How did she get? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
How did she relate to the politicians? Like, how did she make them feel? That, you know, how did she going back to the story of us? That sense of like, we can do this together. Did you hear how she did that with them?
Well, I mean, she first of all mentioned that she owns a preschool and pointed out to them that she's dealt with many, many parents who are probably their constituents. And then she mentioned being part of the Mothers Out Front group. So to make sure that they knew that she wasn't just an individual, even though she brings her own individual passion, but that she's also part of a larger group who may or may not be voting for them in the future.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, she said at one point, she said, you all, you know, I have Lucy and George are the faces that I hold when I do this work, and you all have faces that I know you all have faces here too, right? And I know you wouldn't be doing this work if you didn't care. So she established a connection. She didn't separate entirely the moms. She held them accountable, right? Like, we need you to do this. But she also said, I believe that we together can do this, and you can do this.
You're very faint, Vanessa.
I know. I can't figure out why. Sorry.
Hmm.
It is what it is. I've done everything I can on my end.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just.
I will. Let's see. If you can finish facilitating this, I'm going to see if I can find my earbuds on whether.
Okay. Great. So, did you hear then the three stories in there? The story of self. What was her story of self in a nutshell? What was her story? I mean, you've already pretty much, you know, she's a mom. She ran a daycare center. She's got George, right? Her story of us, how she drew everybody in that room, which included men and might have included people who didn't have children at all, yet she pulled them all together because everybody cares about the future, and that includes children. And then the story of now. What was the urgency? And that's where Laura said she could really feel the anger, the frustration, and the sort of pounding, saying, fix the leaks now. Very clear. It's urgent. We need a real call to action.
I know as a mother, one of the things that gives me my sense of urgency is that, you know, now they're saying 12 years. Well, by the time my children are old enough to be advocating for themselves, it will be too late, you know? And so I'm raising these kids who I hope will be leaders, and I want them to have that chance, you know?
Right. Really nice way of putting it. Yeah. All right. Anybody else on this particular story? Did she sound like a professional speaker? Did she sound like she was a professional?
I wouldn't say she sounded professional. She sounded very authentic and real, which sometimes is, I think, better than sounding too polished. So yeah, but not professional, but powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice distinction. Because I think often we think, I can't do this. I'm just, my voice is going to be shaking. My hands will be shaking if I'm holding a paper. That doesn't
Great.
matter. You're you. And the power of these stories is that they're genuine stories from real people. And I don't know, I've been in plenty of hearings where people get up and rattle off the facts again and again and again, and it doesn't move anybody to do anything. But these stories do move people. So, okay.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Better, much
Phew,
better.
okay, that was, I avoided another technical glitch here. All right, so I'm gonna go into the theory a little bit now that we've sort of like gotten into the story, just again to pick it apart to help you, when you go off and craft your stories, like think about what are the elements, because there sort of is a science to this a little bit, and so it's good to use that. All right. So I'm going to use these slides. Oh, no. Okay, view, present. So there are sort of two parts, right? She used what we call the heart. Oh, there. So she told her story, right? She drew people in for the reasons that we said on an emotional level. She made it relatable. She used our imagination. Like, I just think that Lego example and going on the train, 37 times, like I could just picture that. And I could picture like the gas leaks and their age, got that sense of urgency. And that's the motivation that makes you want to act, that makes you outraged, you sort of like get very emotionally engaged. But that's not enough, right? So like we could get all riled up and then what? Like, that doesn't necessarily lead us to create the change that we want. So what we need is strategy. Like, so what are we going to do with those emotions? Like, what is that we're asking? She's asking them to fix the leaks. And who is she asking to fix the leaks? The Boston City Council. What this story doesn't tell actually is why she asked them. And so the story behind this story is that this group of moms in Boston was meeting on a regular basis as part of Mothers Up Front. They were trying to figure out what to do. And one of them brought an article one day to their team meeting and said, did you know that there are all these gas leaks in the city and they're killing the trees, they're explosion hazards, they're polluting, and natural gas is 80 times more potent than CO2 in the first 20 years of its life in the atmosphere. This is outrageous. And so we need to fix these leaks. And then they went off and tried to figure out, well, who has the power to do that? And they found out that, they went and talked to their state reps, they went to talk to, experts, and then they talked to their city council and realized that the Boston City Council actually had the power to pass a resolution to ask the utilities to start fixing the leaks. And that led to 37 towns in Massachusetts passing these resolutions at the municipal level and emboldened the state legislature to pass a state law to require that the utilities look at factor in the environmental impacts of gas leaks for the first time ever. So, the fact that she was standing in front of them, asking them for this wasn't an accident. So really being clear, going up there and saying, this is why you need to act, but being, having a strategy behind that. Why is she talking to the Boston City Council? What is she asking them to do? So that shared understanding of why and how, that's what people need to move to action. If you just do the why without the how, you're just stuck in feelings. If you just do the how without the feelings, that's the sharing the data. We need to do this. Well, people haven't been doing it. So that's really key. Are there any questions about that? Those two pieces that I just mentioned here?
The head and the heart, we call it.
Yeah. And then there's a third component, which is the hands, the skills, which is like, how do you do that? Like, how did they turn out 100 moms to this hearing? How did she learn to tell her story? How did they do the research? So there's like this whole element of, how do you do the work? So in the work that you're doing, you should be thinking about what's the heart, what's the motivation, how are you going to get to your goal? And then what skills do you need to get there? All right, so let's dig into a little bit about why emotions are really important in getting people to act. And I think one question was, did this make you want to join her? I think that's the question. Like, did any of you on this call not feel like, yeah, like I want this city council to act and I'm going to hold them accountable? So I heard, yeah, were you going to say something?
I guess I'm totally new to the group. And so I'm still sort of trying to figure out the larger action plan for the group, really. And so like one of the things that I'm very caught up in right now is the Green New Deal. And I feel like it's absolutely what we need. And I'm really worried that our wonderful new diverse class of freshmen is going to be tempered down rather than brought into the fold. And I'm super worried that we'll end up with Trump for another 4 years if we can't unite the Democratic Party. And so I'm curious.
So let's talk about that sort of strategy at the big picture level.
Yeah.
And we can certainly address that a little later. But right now I'm going to stick to the how we use our stories. Because in order to affect Trump, like with the people that we have right now, if we tried to get Trump to act, do you think we have enough power to do that?
No.
Right. So we need to engage a lot more people. And the way you engage people is at the local level around things that matter to them, that is in front of them. And then you translate it to larger impact, which is why all of you are from different states, and we're running these campaigns at the state and local level all over the country. But anyways, that's a whole other thing. But the point is right now, in order to be able to impact the federal level, we need to engage thousands, if not millions of more moms to put that, because we need to be able to vote him out of office. And right now we just don't have that power.
But it's not just Trump. I mean, it's really...
Right. But anyways, this is not what this training is about. That's another training, which is our theory of change. And it's a really, really great point. And I think, maybe that's the call to action for you when you're talking to people, is like, we need more moms involved here or we need more people involved, because that's what it's going to take in order to get those results at the federal level. So let's go back into sort of the how this works a little bit. I heard Laura talk about the anger. And so I want to ask you all for a second, like, what are times when you've known something needs to be done, but you haven't done it? And why is that? Like, what's gotten in your way of taking action in the past?
For me specifically around this issue, I think it's been that emotional connection. I've been, climate change was actually something I cared quite a bit about in college. It's something I actively thought about, but it's something I did nothing about until after my daughter was born. And I think it is because of that. I think part of it is now I have that stake in the future, where it's not just something abstract that could happen to the future. I could see this immediately impacting my daughter. And that to me, as selfish as it sounds.
You have urgency.
That urgency. Yeah.
Right? Like you have urgency. So that's a big motivator. Any other reasons people on this call have chosen not to act in the past? Like, what's gotten in your way?
I'd say the feeling of hopelessness or depression that come from how big the problem is. That's a big thing that gets in the way.
Yep. Yeah, right. It's like, this is so big, like, I don't see a pathway forward. What the hell can I do, right? As one person. And it's so overwhelming and depressing.
And I would also say that sometimes it's just again, get back to that juggling act. A lot of times it seems not only is it overwhelming, but our everyday to-do list is pretty darn long. And a lot of the things that are idealist things that we would like to address get pushed off the list, and we deal with the priorities. And for a long time, I call it like being on the treadmill of life. And I feel like I finally have emerged from that phase, but there are phases in motherhood where that seems like I just can't deal with that. And but I think that's what's so wonderful about this organization, is it might offer an opportunity to feel like you don't have to do it all. And if we're working together as a collective, we can all do a little bit, but we have that power of feeling we're not alone.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. We don't have to do it all. We can do it together. We can each take a piece. Anybody else has a thought on what's gotten in their way in the past of doing something?
I guess one thing that I would say is I've spent the past year and a half going to a ton of these public meetings and speaking at them, and it's incredibly frustrating. There's so much minutia and bureaucracy and paper shuffling, and it seems very like you're up against a brick wall at these meetings. And so in terms of, I guess I was very inspired by the young people and the gun movements that happen so quickly, really, you know, when taking to the streets. And that's what I'm hoping to see more of, you know, what's happening with the Extension Rebellion in Europe. And I'm trying to figure out how we can start having more school walkouts, actions like that.
Yeah, what do you think that was fueled by, those the students at Parkland? I mean, obviously the violence, but like, what were they feeling? Fear, yeah, and outrage, right?
Yeah, and so we've got the, you know, and I guess that's one thing I'd like to see, is how we can motivate more young people around this topic. I know we've got the lawsuit, and, you know, we've had some of that. It just would be great to have more.
Yep. Well, we'll talk. You and I should definitely talk about strategy, because we're definitely thinking about all those things. So, all right. So let's just go over sort of action inhibitors. So none of you mentioned self-doubt. I know I have self-doubt all the time, right? It's like, oh my God, who am I? Like, do I know how to do this? Like, I don't, you know. So what's the antidote to self-doubt is you can make a difference, right? Like, you don't need to take it all on. You can do one piece. You can do what you know. It really is going to make a difference. Another one is inertia, which I think is a little bit connected to depression, or that sense of like, or there's so much going on. Like, there's no way I can make space in my life right now. And one antidote to inertia that's pretty powerful is urgency, right? I mean, that's what Laura Finnegan was talking about. You know, knowing it's a problem, but it's not until your kid is, you know, there and you're like, wow, I can't afford to not do anything. Apathy, you know, what difference is it going to make? Well, anger can really move you out of apathy, right? Fear, hope, and hope is you're not alone. There is something we can do it together. So as you're crafting your stories, like, really think about, you know, addressing those feelings is really important. Like, think about why people aren't acting. You're not just telling your story, you're motivating other people to action, because that's what we need to do. We need more people in this movement in order to pass the Green New Deal. And we need more people to involve, you know, to back the youth with Sunrise. So what are the things that you can tell in your story that are going to speak to, acknowledge and validate people's self-doubt, inertia, apathy, fear, because we all feel that stuff. And, you know, how can you inspire them to move? Oh, and isolation, right? We feel alone, like, what, you know, that's just one of the worst places to be. But if we're together, then it gives us courage. All right. So, Sue, you want to go over the recap of what makes a good story?
Yeah, so we've looked at those motivators. That's powerful, but how do we use those? I mean, how do we take those emotions, and we know they exist, we know a bit about how they operate, how do we get those into a story so that the story taps those emotions? There are a bunch of you on this call who are already storytellers. You probably know this. And what makes a good story? It's the same thing that you learned in a writing class in school, but a good story paints a picture. It doesn't just tell people what you think is wrong with the world today and what you think they should do, but it paints a picture. Paints a picture of you, paints a picture of us together, and it paints a picture of the future. And there's a challenge to it. There's suspense. There are a lot of details, and it's those details that are really, really important to making these stories effective. They're really describing and capturing a moment in time, not a laundry list of first I did this, and then I felt that, and then I did something else. They're not a list. They're really capturing a moment and bringing the audience into that moment, touching the audience, the emotions of the people that are listening to you. So if you can do that with all the details and really paint that picture, you've got the gist of a really good story. And one other thing, next, can we go to the next slide, is this is about being inclusive. When you're writing your stories, thinking about your stories, think about the experience or the experiences of the people that you're talking to. Who are they? Who's your audience? Don't use a lot of lingo or acronyms that they might not know. Think about the backgrounds and the races, the cultures that your audience brings to the table. You know, if I say, well, gee, the way I respond to climate change is I went out and I bought a Tesla because electric cars are the future and this is the best thing. Well, you know, how many people can afford a Tesla? So if I'm trying to convince somebody to join me in this movement and I say, you know, and here's what I did, I bought a Tesla, even if that's what I did, it isn't, but even if it were, that's not going to draw that person in. What I can do is say, well, what I did was to do the best I could to use the technologies that are coming along. I mean, some way that's not off-putting, that is relatable to all moms, or if you're speaking to a mixed audience, that's relatable to everyone, that includes everyone, that can bring everybody along. So be sensitive to that, because people have different means, they come from different cultural backgrounds, and the way we tell our stories can really make a difference. You know, and it's not that you can't tell your story. I mean, if your story includes Teslas, that's your story. There's nothing wrong with that. More power, we need more Teslas. But there's a way to talk about that in a way that isn't gonna alienate you from the very people you're trying to draw in to work with you.
Can I ask a quick question around the inclusive side? I'm very curious how we can have this conversation with Republicans. I hate to say it because I'm just assuming vastly we're all Democrats, but it's hard for me to not exclude people who don't already believe in climate change or people who might not be aware of it. And I think it's important not to. I think it's really important to include everybody. I don't want to see Republicans, because I actually know there's quite a few really good movements out there about Republicans who are trying to advocate for cleaner energy. So I don't want to say that, but people who might, support gas and oil, and I don't know if that's just lack of knowledge, but how do we have this conversation without naturally excluding those people? Because that's where I really struggle, especially since I'm a little bit of a bubble in Silicon Valley where the vast majority of people I know are Democrats. So, yeah.
That's a great question. So one of the reasons Mothers Out Front was founded was with the premise that moms can come together around shared values and shared experience. And so connecting around that experience, before you talk about your political opinions, but like we all have kids that we want to keep safe today. And also acknowledging that, that moms have different threats that are facing their kids, right? That there are moms right now who, are sending their kids to school and who don't know whether those kids are going to get shot, on the way to school and whether they could come home. And so like climate change may be, something secondary really. Thinking about the fact that, everybody wants to make sure that their kids have, clean water to drink. So really drawing from that experience of being a mom, and then, going back to being inclusive, like really being thoughtful about your language. So we had a team in Southern California in Orange County, and actually there's a team in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where, climate change is not something people like to talk about, and sea level rise in terms of climate change. And so they talk about recurrent flooding, and they talk about energy. They don't talk about climate. So there are lots of ways, there are also other ways to act on climate, which is getting rid of fossil fuels. And if it is about, making sure that you have a safe neighborhood to live in now, right? That where, Marnie's kids can breathe the air and not worry about having to get an asthma attack. So I think it's our responsibility to really be thoughtful about that. And then to build bridges, right, across constituencies and really listen to people as I talk at you right now.
Time check.
Yeah.
I'm doing a time check.
Okay, thank you. All right. There's so much to talk about, right? And we could go, and so I'm keeping this focused on, but these are great questions. Sort of what's the strategy, you know, how do we build those bridges? And so we're going to keep figuring that out together. So I'm going to quickly recap, let's see, just the elements, because again, you're going to, you know, the next step here is for you to go out and craft your stories, and we want to make sure they're as good as possible. So in any good stories, you've got 3 components. You've got the story of self. You're inviting others to be in relationship, right? It's not about trying to convince people that you're right. It's about finding out who they are, what they care about, and discovering shared values. That's really what it's about. And finding out, you know, why would this Republican mom care about this? Like, what does she think about this? And asking questions, really. But sharing who you are and why you care. Then you invite others to join in the community. Like, we as moms can make a difference together, and we're not alone, and we don't have to all figure it out by ourselves. And then, you know, invite others to take action. That's the story of now. Like, what are we called to do now? And then within each one of these things, the story of self, us, and now, you really want to think about, oftentimes, you know, what inspires people to action. There's a saying that courage is contagious, and overcoming challenge is what this is all about, right? We have a huge challenge in front of us. And so we need to have faith and hope that we can together overcome that challenge. And so as you build your story, what is the challenge you encountered, right? You have children, and you are, you know, want to make sure that they can breathe clean air. You want to make sure that in 2030, there's going to be a viable future. And so your challenge is, you know, overwhelm, you know, the sense of outrage, feeling powerless against corporations. But you've made a choice. You've all made a choice, which is that you've chosen to be here today and start joining with other moms to act and do something. And the outcome is, you know, what happens as a result of that. So we're going to listen to that a little bit in Sue's story, really dig into the challenge, choice, outcome, because that's a really important part of structuring the story. So Sue, I'm going to stop sharing. And how are we doing on time? We're on time, right?
Nope. We're a little behind.
Okay. All right.
That's okay.
Okay.
We'll do it.
All right. So as you listen to Sue's story, again, think about story of self, us, and now, but also start listening to, where do you hear Sue encountering a challenge, or where do you hear Sue talking about us as a group of moms encountering a challenge, or our society? What are the choices that are being made, and what's the outcome?
Okay, so I'm going to speak with my grandmother heart today. I have 2 grandchildren, Ada, who's now 5, and Henry, who's almost 2. Ada has been delighted by colors since she was a little baby. I used to walk her around town in the stroller when she was little, and she would name the colors. Blue, she would pronounce as we went by a bed of iris, or red, she would yell as we passed some tulips. Tulips are her favorite flowers, she says, because they come in every color. When she got to be 4 years old, we created colorful worlds together out of blocks, wooden blocks, and paper. We built grocery stores and filled them with colorful fruits and vegetables. She tells me what to draw, then I draw, then she colors them in, then I cut them out. Cut on the lines, Grammy, she insists. We also made cities with colorful people and cars, and we made farms with colorful animals and oceans filled with colorful sea creatures. We'd have them all set up, and then I would hear, "Oh no, here he comes." It was Henry. For Ada's toy worlds, the only real threat was little Henry. But sadly, that's not true for the real world. Over the past 5 years, each time I've learned more about the harmful effects of our use of fossil fuels, I've seen the faces of my grandchildren. And that image grew to include children all around the world who will be handed a world in crisis. And it's a crisis they didn't create, but their lives are going to be shaped by it. They're going to be endangered by it, and they might even be ended by it. And I knew then that I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I had a moral responsibility to act. So for the first time in my life, I became politically active, contacting and meeting with elected officials to discuss my concerns and learn of theirs. And I joined Mothers Out Front and carved out time to testify at hearings, quaking in my boots as I did it. In spite of the work being hard and time-consuming, I found it gratifying. Seeing that sea of mothers and their Mothers Out Front t-shirts inspires me. And hearing our powerful stories really helps drive away the feelings of despair that threaten to overwhelm me. And being able to act out of the love of my grandchildren gives me hope for the future. All of us, everybody on this call, all of us have worked hard in our own ways already to address the climate issue. We've all joined Mothers Out Front, some just recently and others a while back. We've carved out time in our busy schedules to be on this call. And we've worked hard for the past hour and a half. I applaud your efforts, and I thank you for joining Vanessa and me today. But this is just the start. There's more work to be done. Over the next week, you'll need to make time to develop your story. And it's a really busy time of year with schools just starting up after the holidays. It's going to be really easy. It's always easy to just say, I simply don't have the time. But we all know how to make time. We did it today. I ask you to continue to make time over the next week. As you do this work, I urge you to keep human faces in the forefront, the faces of children and grandchildren, yours and mine. They're in our schools, they're on the playgrounds, they're riding their bikes, they're building block worlds. They don't know about the quickening pace of climate change. They don't know about the potential for crop failures, flooding from sea level rise, the spread of disease, and the potential of displacement of whole communities. They're trusting us to keep them safe. And we can't walk away from that, no matter how easy it might be to do just that. And think of the power when all of you go out into the world and tell your stories. 7 more moms testifying and moving decision makers to act for the clean energy future that we all want. 7 more moms inspiring others to join us in promoting a safe future for ourselves and our children. Can you do that? Will you do that? Will you help each other to do that over the next week? That's my ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Who's inspired?
I am.
You had me tearing up at the end, so there you go.
Me too. All right. So I feel like we spent a lot of time on the theory piece. I don't want to spend too much more time. And I do want to give us a little bit of time to explore those other questions that people have that aren't necessarily connected directly to story, because I can sense that that's important. But I will quickly just let's take a few minutes to really think about that challenge, choice, outcome thing. So what's the challenges? What are the challenges that you heard Sue talk about? Like, what are the challenges she faced that what are the challenges that moms are facing? What are the challenges what are the challenges we're facing in general?
She did mention that, Sue, you mentioned that you were nervous when you first were going out and talking because it was your first time in that realm, maybe.
Sorry, my internet connection.
It's good. You're there.
Yeah, sorry, it froze up on me, and then I got a message saying that the internet was shaky. But anyway, that was one of the challenges, is just finding the time to focus and do and act on these things.
And so, wait, the first one was, so what was the choice that was made out of that challenge? Finding the time. What's the choice she's asking us to make?
to make the time.
And what's the outcome that she described if we make the time?
It change, essentially, as you know. Well, I mean, for this specifically, finding the time to tell our stories that could then propagate to inspiring more people and uniting more moms behind this particular cause.
Yeah, she was
like it.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was just going to say the same thing, like an exponential increase. If the 7 of us, you go out and then share it, and then that gets more people. And I think that's exactly what we need.
Right. So like the difference, right, of it's like, okay, yeah, this is a challenge we all have, right? How do we make the time between now and next Sunday to work on this story, to pair up for a half hour with somebody else on this call to work on this when you have like all this stuff going on? Your kid might get sick, you've got a crisis at school, you've got a crisis at work, you're not getting enough sleep. But like the benefit, I mean, if we don't do this, right, what's the outcome, right? It's the crop failures and the future, right, that we're going to have if we don't act. The outcome, if we do take the time, just the 7 of us here, is there are going to be that many more moms like Claire in Boston City Council who are moving, and that works, right? And you're going to inspire other moms to join you, going back to Gail's concern that, we need to act really big. We need a whole lot more people. So this is really, really important. So I'm not going to belabor this. I mean, are there any questions about the challenge choice outcome structure and why that's important?
Can you just remind me what the challenge choice outcome structure is?
Yes, thanks for asking, because clearly, so here we are. Let me look at this. So within your story, so you've got, the story of self, us, and now, right? So why are you called to action? Who are we together? Why can we make a difference? And then what are we called to do together? So you're structuring your story that way. Within that, one of the things that's really impactful is naming, going back to those emotions, right? What gets in the way of people acting? It's their challenges, right? It's, I don't have time, I'm scared, I'm alone, I don't know how to do this, I'm not an expert. And so as you tell your story, you want to be modeling for people how you have moved from passivity and being unable to act for whatever reason. So you really want to name your challenge. Like, what is the challenge that you faced, right? What's the choice that you made? So in this case, Sue's asking you, she's naming your challenge. You may not have time. You may not think you have time between now and then. You're super busy, right? The choice she's asking you to make is make the time. This is really important. And here's why. And here's the outcome. And so actually, in this case, she did the challenge choice outcome around the story of now, which is what are you, this group right now, called to do? You're called to write your story between now and next week. And the positive outcome is if you do this, we're gonna be 7 more people out there really moving decision makers, impacting, inspiring other moms to join us. The negative impact of not making that choice is, business as usual, and the seeing the future that we're afraid of materialize. But that structure operates at every level. So Sue, can you speak to what the challenge was in your story of self? Are you there? You're muted if.
There we go. I started out talking about the block worlds with Ada and how they were being wrecked by Henry. And I moved that then to the challenge and how, those were just block worlds. That was just little Henry, but that's not true of the real world. So the challenge in the real world, as I learned about it over those 5 years, was I needed to do something. I learned about the devastating effects of our use of fossil fuels, and I felt I had a moral responsibility to act. And so that's what I had to do. So the outcome of that challenge was—
Wait, what was the choice you made?
The choice I made was to get politically involved. For the first time in my life, I became politically active. So that was the outcome there. And what I did was go and meet with city officials and testify. I joined Mothers Out Front, all of that good stuff. Then the story of us in this particular story that I told, the story of us was saying, you know, we've all done a lot about climate change already in our lives. I mean, I've heard, you know, you all talked about it earlier on this call, what you've been doing. Everybody's been doing something already, which is terrific. But the challenge is, it's not enough. It's not enough. And here we are together. So the choice we can make is, let's get together, let's work on our stories over the next week and get that done. And what will the result be? And that's the story of now. The result of choosing to make time for that. The challenge always is we don't have enough time. Who said about the treadmill of life? It really is the treadmill of life. It's much better when you're a grandmother, but that's not going to help you guys.
I want to highlight something. No, go ahead. Sorry.
So it's making time. It's actually making time, committing yourself to doing it over the next week, getting together with your partner to coach each other. That's the challenge, is for you to make the time, and the outcome is going to be terrific. I know.
So I'm going to use this moment as a coaching moment to model coaching. So Sue, I'm curious, one of the things I didn't hear in your story, you talk about, well, we make the time, but when have you experienced moms, you know, sort of together, like encountering a challenge that makes you like that makes you believe that like that these moms here are going to make the time next week? Or sort of what's a challenge that where you've seen mothers sort of collectively do something that
it's actually in there when I talk about seeing the sea of t-shirts at City Hall in Boston. When I go in there at a meeting and you walk in and you look around and you look for the Mothers Out Front t-shirts, and there they are. They're all sitting there. And then one or two will get up and tell their stories in testifying in the midst of all the other people who are telling their factual stories. And you watch the city councilors and the legislators, and they just stop listening when people get up and rattle off the facts, because they know all the facts. They've known it for years. When mothers get up and tell their stories, they listen because it's a story. I mean, it draws them in. So that's what makes me hopeful about the fact that mothers can actually do this. Why do I think that this group of mothers is going to do it? Because you're all here right now and you've already made the time. You know how to do it, and you did do it. So I feel very hopeful that over the next week, somehow you're going to carve out a time.
Right. So yeah, so that was a perfect example of challenge, choice, outcome in the story of us. Like, what's the challenge? How do we know that we're the right people to do this, right? And because we've already done this kind of thing, we've seen it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Are there any questions about we're coming to a close of sort of the background and the whys and the how. And so the next step is we're going to talk about next steps, but are there any lingering questions around the storytelling? I know there are lots of questions around other things, but.
Do you feel you can go off and?
Oh, Gail, you're muted. Here, I'll unmute you. Hold on.
Oh, are we doing these next week? And do you want us to have a certain time, like a minute?
That's a great question. Yes, a really good story should not be more than 3 minutes, like the whole thing. After that, you lose people. So yes, we're asking you to put these stories together and try to keep them to 3 to 4 minutes. And it takes a while to get these. This is not an easy thing to do, and it happens, and it'll change over time. But yes. Any other questions?
Linda had a good one. Oh, you just answered it.
Yeah. We'll be sharing a template. Yes, we're going to be sending out. So Sue, do you want to go into next steps and let people know?
Let's talk about yes, the answer to Gail's question is yes. We want each of you to go off over the next week and write your story. And it should have the 3 components: story of self, story of us, story of now, with challenge, choice, and outcome to the best of your ability. keep in mind it's just a draft. It'll always be a draft. It'll never be finished, so don't worry about it. It'll keep evolving, and it'll change depending on who you're giving it to. So just jump in and start doing it. But what we're going to do is Vanessa's going to pair each of you up, so you'll have a buddy for the next week. And the idea is go off and develop your story, get in touch with your buddy by email, and plan to share and coach each other. Now, what's coaching all about? What Vanessa's going to do is send out an email with some coaching tips in them. Coaching is part of the heart of Mothers Out Front. Everybody in Mothers Out Front coaches everybody. And again, that's moms helping moms. So you're going to read your first draft to your buddy. She's gonna do the best of her ability to say, can you tell me more details? Can you put more details in here? I didn't hear this, or what really grabbed me was, always important to emphasize the good parts in it. But so the idea is that you'll be paired up with a buddy, you write your story, you get in touch during the week, you share your stories with each other and coach each other, fiddle with it to the best of your ability. And then next Sunday, we'll come back here and everybody will share their stories and we'll coach. We'll all coach you as you read yours. Okay? One thing to think about, and this is really important, when it's really helpful to have in mind where you're going to be using this story for the first time. If you have an opportunity where in the next 3 or 4 weeks, there's going to be a public hearing and you could get up and testify at it, perfect. If there's a Mothers Out Front meeting where you could give your story to the assembled group of mothers, terrific. If there's just a friend who you think might want to join Mothers Out Front, you could give your story to her. But it's good to have in mind a really specific who are you going to be giving it to and when, and make it soon. And why are you going to be doing that? What's the point? Because that will help you to tailor your ask. What are you asking of this person? Very different if you're talking to a friend. Your ask might be, would you come to the next Mothers Out Front meeting with me? Or would you help me organize a Mothers Out Front group? If it's a legislator.
In Santa Cruz.
It'll be, yeah, right. It's a legislator you're talking to, it'd be something very different. So having in mind who you're going to be giving this to it will help you tailor the first version of your story. So
great.
Is everybody pretty clear about how to proceed from here? I mean, do you feel prepared to do this? Use that structure to help you along. It's a lot easier to work.
And I'll be sending out an email with sort of a recap of this, so you don't have to have it up here, and some coaching tips. Coaching it really is about asking questions, being curious, focus on the things that you really liked, build on what works, and then ask questions about the things that maybe didn't work as much. I thought I had missed the challenge choice outcome in Sue's story of us. So I asked her, I was like, when was the time you experienced moms together, prioritizing making time for something really important? I didn't say, Sue, that was terrible. You totally missed that part. Which she hadn't. So anyways, there's some just basic coaching tips. But again, coaching is not about one. It's just about, having that perspective, because you're hearing something and so you have a perspective that the other person doesn't, and it's helpful. All right. Any other questions about next steps?
I'm curious to what extent you're using Instagram and Facebook and social media to spread these stories too, just in terms of trying to grow the viral aspect.
We are a lot. So that's a great point. Anytime you tell a story, make sure that somebody's taping you. And actually, Laura, when you came on the call, and I was like, oh, she looks really familiar. And then I realized we may have been in a meeting before together, but I realized it's because you shared your story. And then it was shared on Facebook and Twitter about why you joined Mothers Out Front. And so we use these a lot, both in memes and recordings. And yes, and Laura, you and Gail, you and I should talk about sort of our strategy for growing big, because I totally hear the urgency around that, and that is actually something I'm working on, and that directly involves the Green New Deal. So let's talk. Yeah, and I have a call into the Sunrise Movement, and we're talking about putting together a webinar at the end of the month to talk about how Mothers Out Front engages on the Green New Deal with the youth. So
well, and I know there's also Extinction Rebellion happening in the Bay Area. So I don't know, like, if these groups could somehow all come together, because it seems like
so you can talk with Linda about that, who's one of the lead organizers in California.
Okay.
Sounds like you guys will get together.
Okay.
All right. So any last questions before we move into meeting evaluation?
Can I just say, Vanessa, I'm really glad to hear that you're really working on the Green New Deal, because that kind of economy and jobs is going to be really important in areas like Ohio. That's a real big key in talking to people who aren't already with us. So I'm really glad to hear that and excited to hear what comes out of it.
Great. And Marnice and I are meeting tomorrow, I think, to talk about the Frontline Fellows Program in Ohio and Western PA. And, you know, Marnice's work at the NAACP, I think, is very much connected to economic justice and energy democracy, and really finding solutions that are, you know, about creating local jobs and freeing people from the stranglehold of, you know, the fossil fuel industry and the utilities. So very much thinking about the just transition piece.
Not even just the local jobs, but when you get into the whole environmental justice aspect, I mean, really, you know, Trump's speaking to coal miners and that, and he's speaking to these people who need work, but they're trading, you know, their healthy surroundings for a job. You know, no one should have to make that choice. And so it's.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so one of the norms that we like to uphold at Mothers Out Front is finishing on time and really respecting people's time. So it's we have 7 minutes, and as I said when we started, we are figuring this out as we go along, and everything that you all bring to the table is new insight and resources and knowledge that helps us get better at this. And so we finish every meeting with a go around to say, what's one thing that you found really effective in the way this training was run? What's one thing that you would do differently that would make it even better, assuming that it was good? And what's like one aha moment? Like what's one learning that you're really taking away that sort of has shifted your perception or light bulb that went off? And so we'll go around and we'll do the same thing. I'll pick on the first person, and then you just say one, because again, we don't have much time. So one thing you learned, one thing you liked, one thing you change, or you think could make it better, and then you pass it on. So I'm going to start with Christine.
All right, so I think I learned a lot today. One specific thing was thinking about the actual structure, and then in each piece having the challenge, choice, and outcome to make the story arc super effective. One thing I would change is actually from a personal standpoint. We had a really long day earlier today, so I wasn't in the best headspace. So I think next week on Sunday, I'm going to try to make sure that I'm not scheduled so that I can provide more full attention and feel refreshed about what's going on rather than like rushing into this. And shoot, I forgot what was my last thing.
One thing you that really worked for you.
Oh, what really worked for me was having stories that we could break down together to kind of talk about how they work and why. I always find that super effective.
Thanks. You want to pass it on?
Sure. How about Gail?
Gosh, I mean, I like just the technical aspect of being able to see everybody at once. That's something I haven't done before. And I like that it's sort of forming a bit of community here in the digital realm, because I've been honestly pretty depressed and feeling kind of alone about this. It's interesting because when you start to talk about, it's very difficult to talk about this with people, because some people, even friends, it's just so awful. They don't want to be part of it, and they'll literally stop. So learning to find that balance of urgency and hope, I think is really important. So, how about Laura Skidmore?
So, echoing Gail there, I really like Zoom. This works so well. Being able to see everyone and being able to do breakout sessions, really loving Zoom. Echoing Christine, the challenge, choice, and outcome piece. These were things I learned before, but it's good to have the refresh. Remember, oh yeah, challenge, choice, outcome in each part of the story. That's powerful. Good to know. And then one thing that I would find helpful to do differently would be to clarify, to state at the beginning what materials are going to be sent out. Like, is the slide deck going to be sent out, notes, that kind of thing, because I'm a note taker anyway, but it would be helpful to know what's going to be coming, or even to have it maybe in advance. Then I could take notes on the materials.
Good idea. Good idea. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
I forgot I need to pass it on. Marnice.
Okay. So I learned more about the story arc. I'm glad that you really talked about that. Usually when I do public hearings, I just get up there and speak. So I felt that I needed that structure. Then I like the fact that you acknowledge the whole self-doubt, because I know when I come in contact with a lot of mothers, even myself, that's the first thing. Well, I can't do that. I don't know the technical jargon, especially around the energy and utility justice work. So I really appreciate you acknowledging self-doubt, because I do struggle with that, especially when I'm talking to politicians and commissioners. And then change, I probably change the time next week of when I collaborate with my kids' drop off for dance class. So I gotta figure that out. And I'll pass that on to Colleen. Did you go? Nope.
Okay. Well, I was just very inspired. Again, I love this whole format. I don't do this kind of thing a lot, and I think the technology worked great. Really enjoyed being able to see people, and just everything was very easy, and I'm not a techie person, so thank you. I really was excited it feels like, again, I've worked by myself as an artist for 23, 24 years. I love the sense of community that can be brought about through this organization, and I just feel a sense of hope in the power, for the potential for the collective moving forward to make change. Need to talk to people from all over the country, really effective way. No, I think everything was great. The story telling info was wonderful on the structure. So everything was really clear. I really appreciate it. I'm inspired to write.
Great.
Want to pass it on?
I'm sorry, I forgot. Let's see. Christine went. Who didn't go yet? Let's see. Laura Finnegan.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just really liked learning about how to structure your story. In my work life, I'm super analytical, but when I start talking about my personal stuff, I get super emotional. So it was really, I liked how bringing that sense of structure and analysis to the emotional aspect. I thought that worked really well. And my aha moment was just that one slide that showed the strategy and the affect and how you described it. I loved how you put, you know, if you stick in the affect part, you get stuck in the emotion. But if you get stuck in the strategy, then you don't affect change. I loved that slide. I thought that was so perfect. So that was my aha moment. Honestly, there's not anything I would necessarily change. I'm really excited to dig into the more personal side of the story. So I would say that's the thing I would change, but I know we're getting to that next week. So I'm not sure that I would actually change that. So I thought it worked really well.
Great, thank you all. All right, so did anybody not go? That's like actively participating today. All right, so we'll be sending you an email, follow up with the materials, the slide deck, you know, another couple of slides around coaching, and I'll send you your partner to pair up. And so your job between now and next week is to make the time, connect with each other, find a time to talk, work on your stories, find a time to talk, get some feedback, work on your story more, and be ready to share it next Sunday. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, the most important thing is to just jump in. So thank you all for taking the 2 hours away from your kids and the rest of your lives. Really appreciate it. It's totally inspiring to me every time I meet more moms and hear their stories. So thanks for keeping me going. All right. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. And Linda, I'll connect with you on Google Hangout. And Gail, we should talk some other time about the larger picture. I'll set up a time to meet with you. And you can talk to Linda as well. I'll send you an email. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, people.
Bye-bye.
Bye.